Hey guys, Pete here. I was doing some research that led me back to the Prince That Was Promised theory, so I thought I'd make a video about it. The show hasn't deviated much from the books in regards to the prophecy itself, other than cutting out an important reference to it in Season 2 when Dany is in the House of Undying. During Season 6, it did reference the prophecy in a marine scene, though, that isn't from the books, and there was a somewhat heavy-handed reference in the Tower of Joy scene, too, so it certainly hasn't been cut completely out. First time we hear about the Prince That Was Promised in the books is on that trip through the House of Undying when Dany sees her brother Rhaegar with his wife Elia Martell and their newborn son Aegon. He tells her he is the prince that was promised, and his is the Song of Ice and Fire. Rhaegar had once thought he might be the prince that was promised, as did Maester Aemon, but later decided that it would be his son. The Targaryens believed that the prince would be born of their line because Rhaegar's grandfather, Jaehaerys II, had visited a woods witch that told him that it would be that way. Jaehaerys had his two children Rhaella and Aerys, Dany's parents, wed because the witch told him that the prince would come from their line. It isn't known where the prophecy started, as there isn't much information about it that we can draw from. Based on the fact that Maester Aemon mentions 1,000 years to Samwell, it should be safe to say that the prophecy is at least that old. According to Melisandre, the prince that was promised coming was prophesied over 5,000 years ago, but she doesn't make any mention of who made the actual prophecy. Melisandre sort of uses the prince that was promised and Azor Ahai interchangeably, but we hear her talk of Azor Ahai far more often. On the other hand, Aemon never mentions the name Azor Ahai when he's talking about the prince that was promised. There are a lot of similarities in both prophecies, though, and there are a couple of references where they overlap. Both involve Maester Aemon. One time he asked Melisandre about the prince that was promised in relation to the War for the Dawn, and another time he tells Samwell that the prince would be born of salt and smoke, which is the same thing Melisandre says about Azor Ahai. Many of the theories that are based about Azor Ahai and the prince that are promised being different are also related to Maester Aemon. He doesn't use the name Azor Ahai when he talks about Daenerys being the prince that was promised, but he's very aware that the Azor Ahai prophecy exists. We know this because he left the Jade Compendium for Jon to read, which tells of the story of Azor Ahai and his sword Lightbringer. One big difference is that you never really hear people talking about the prince that was promised wielding a sword like Azor Ahai in that prophecy. But there is a reference to Rhaegar deciding to become a knight after he read something in his scrolls, meaning that he may have uncovered something to the effect that he needed to learn to handle a sword to fulfill the prophecy. We also learn that the prince part isn't exactly right. Aemon tells Sam that High Valyrian is a gender-neutral language and that dragons are neither male or female. This meant that everyone was misled thinking it was a prince for over 1,000 years. Here are the signs of the coming of the prince that was promised. The birth of a prince. This could be wrong since Maester Aemon says that it could be prince or princess based on High Valyrian being gender-neutral. The prince is of the blood of the dragon. The Woods Witch would say that it's specifically the blood that comes from Aerys and Rhaella. Born amidst smoke, born amidst salt, a bleeding star in the skies, which has also been mentioned like being born beneath a bleeding star. There's also the possibility of the return of dragons. This comes from the Dunk and Egg stories. When he was a boy, Egg recalled that King Aerys I read about the return of dragons in a prophecy. Aemon and Melisandre give us most of the information about the prophecy, and they both have different ideas about who fulfills it. When he was young, Aemon thought it was Rhaegar and possibly then his son Aegon until he was killed during the sack of King's Landing. Later, when Samwell tells him about Daenerys and her dragons, he immediately thinks it's her. Melisandre thinks it's Stannis until he dies in the show, and then says it's Jon after he comes back to life. For contrast, these are the signs Azor Ahai is reborn. After a long summer, when the stars bleed and the cold breath of darkness falls heavy on the world, or when the red star bleeds and the darkness gathers, he shall be born again amidst smoke and salt. He shall wake the dragons out of stone. He shall draw from the fire a burning sword, which is Lightbringer. So there are a bunch of similarities here. The burning sword is the major difference, and it makes you wonder how they aren't just a variation of the same story. After all, prophecy is like that. If a story has been passed around for centuries, it would likely change as different cultures adopted it and made it their own. The Great Flood myth is a good example of this in the real world. Most people in Western culture grew up learning that the story story about Noah and the great ark he built in preparation. Long before this story appeared in the Bible, it existed in different cultures with different details. There's Gilgamesh, and there's many other different examples. From an objective, non-religious viewpoint, you might think that the Christian faith co-opted this story because it tells a great story of a human craving life in the face of calamity. We know details related to the prince that was promised sound very Targaryen. Rhaegar says that Aegon is the prince that was promised, but then he adds that there must be another because the dragon has 3 heads. The names he gave his children seem to suggest he relates this to Aegon the Conqueror and his 2 sister wives, Rhaenys and Visenya. We don't know exactly why he connects this to the prophecy, but can agree that this is a Targaryen-specific kind of detail. On the other hand, Melisandre mentions the prince that was promised without the Targaryen references. In the TV show, Kinvara tells Tyrion that Daenerys is the one that was promised, which I assume is just a gender-neutral way of saying it, but doesn't mention Lightbringer or a dragon with 3 heads. All of this further muddies the waters about whether the 2 prophecies are from the same original and have just morphed over time based on cultures. That means we can't deduce if the prince that was promised in Azor Ahai would be the same person if the prophecy was fulfilled. There have been good theories written for it being the same person, and there have been good theories written about it being 2 separate people. At the end of the day, there are only 2 super strong candidates, which are Daenerys and Jon Snow. Many of the other people that you could bring up just don't really fit the bill, especially the way the story has developed overall. Dany fits the prince that was promised and also woke dragons from stone. She doesn't have Lightbringer though, and Jon seems like a much better candidate to wield an actual sword in battle against the White Walkers. At the same time, he hasn't woken any dragons and isn't in possession of a flaming sword, so neither fulfills the aspects of the Azor Ahai version, and on top of that we have the Targaryen specific mention of the dragon having 3 heads for the prince that was promised. If you watch my Importance of Prophecy video, you know I think it is likely that the prophecy will be fulfilled, but what is really important is that each of these character stories will be shaped by decisions they make in relation to it. In the books, Jon is still dead, Stannis is still alive, and Daenerys is far behind her story where she is at, in the show. I think it's safe to say that Jon will be resurrected and Daenerys will make it to Westeros. How we get there probably won't happen in the same way as it did in the show, but in the end, I think the story is leading to the same place. So until The Winds of Winter is released, we can't say for sure how the stories are going to shake out. The question then is, can we tell how these prophecies will shape the end of the story in the show? It's hard to say. In general, I would say yes, this does give us a good idea that there will be a big war coming. It will be a war for the Dawn, or a war to beat back the forces of the others, which would like to destroy humanity. I mean, this is obvious for a lot of reasons, but we could just go with the first thing that we hear about in the prologue of the books, and the first thing we see in the show is the Night's Watch coming in contact with the White Walker. From there, we can agree that the Iron Throne isn't what's important here, because the real threat to everything has been building beyond the wall right from the very start. The show has accelerated everything to the point that we will experience the conclusion of the story pretty soon. Regardless of how you feel about how they've done this, we know that the end they are working towards is based on what George R. R. Martin told them about how he envisions the end of the story. The major places they go should be consistent, even though the details on how they get there are different. If the showrunners know who the prince that was promised / Azor Ahai is, I find it important that they made sure to show young Ned place the sword Dawn at the foot of the bed where Jon was born. I mentioned at the beginning that it was heavy-handed because there's really no other reason to make this part of the scene stand out. Dawn is Hal Stain's ancestral sword that was forged from a falling star, and also has, the falling star right on the hilt. They set this up to leave no question that Jon Snow was born under a bleeding star. If you think there's another reason to add this part of the scene, please let me know in the comments, because I just can't get around it. Does that in itself mean that Jon Snow is Azor Ahai, though? I mean, definitely not. After all, Daenerys is the one who woke the dragons out of stone, and she's currently the only one who's able to ride one of them. I'm not a big fan of the idea that the dragons themselves are Lightbringer, and I don't see Jon waking any other dragons from stone anytime soon. So that leaves us with 3 possible conclusions. 1. More will be revealed to make either Jon or Daenerys alone fulfill the prophecy. 2. Jon will fulfill one of the prophecies, and Dany will fulfill the other. Or 3. There is only one prophecy which is fulfilled by both both of them together. It's not a question of if one of them is the prince that was promised and one is Azor Ahai, but instead it's that they are both equally important to fulfill the prophecy in the end. So I don't know, let me know what you think. I'm heavily leaning towards the third option right now. Like I said, there's a ton of interesting theories that have been written for every possible outcome here, but I don't see either candidate taking the lead like in the race in the show. Most theories are based on the books because there's way more evidence to draw on, but at the end of the day, I do believe that George has told D&D where to go, if not how to get there. What happens in the show matters, but can it help us solve the mystery? Leave a comment and tell me what you think. Is Azor Ahai and the prince that was promised two different people? Is it the same person and you think you know who it is? How would you discount either John or Danny and say that one is more important than the other? Is the prophecy all a bunch of nothing that was just basically woven into the story so that we all waste a bunch of time trying to figure it out? Please like the video and subscribe to my channel. I have a giveaway going on for when I hit 18,000 subscribers. I'm giving away a copy of A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, which is the Dunk and Egg stories, and all you have to do is be a subscriber and leave a comment. It's an awesome book, so make sure you subscribe now for your chance to win. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.